1. So this happened when I was much younger. I want to say freshman in high school, probably like 2008. There used to be this road near where I lived in California called Croak Road. It was barely a road, no one traveled on it, and it was surrounded by small patches of forest and some abandoned barns and houses. I would typically go there with my friends to skateboard and hang out. This one night, I was hanging out with two of my friends, Lucas and Dorian, and someone wanted to go to Croak Road to hang out since it was creepy at night. It might sound strange, but we loved exploring like a bunch of 5th graders. And we weren't really into smoking or anything, so what else was there to do? I asked my 20-year-old brother James if he could drive us down into one of the nature reserves by the road. This specific reserve was larger than the others, and had a network of gravel paths leading through it. Basically, we were looking for unexplored territory to hike in. Soon one particular path we were traveling down had become so narrow, James's Ford Explorer couldn't pass through it, so we got out and walked for a while, chatting and just having fun. We walked through the woods for about half an hour until it had gotten relatively dark out, and the sun was gone, at which point we turned around to head back to the car. It's now I should mention that despite being near a lot of sub-developments, this patch of forest was huge. I'd say about 1,000 acres, and rarely visited since it was easy to get lost in, especially at night. It was a challenge getting the car turned around, but James managed it, and we were off down the road. Dorian proposed we turn down a different path we had passed by earlier, since we had about another 40 minutes until our parents wanted us back, and we agreed. Down this path was a tiny pond Dorian wanted to check out and take pictures of since he hadn't gotten the opportunity to visit it at night. It was slow going since this road was even crappier than the main one we were traveling on that turned off of Croak Road. Minutes later, we got into a slight argument. Dorian was convinced James had taken a wrong turn, since we should have arrived at the pond by now, while James claimed that he had been driving straight the whole time. It was dark after all. Eventually, we came to a fork in the road that none of us were familiar with. None of us knew which way to go, so we ended up guessing and going left, hoping that both directions would ultimately lead back to the main path. None of us were scared or anything. In fact, we were actually excited and intrigued, driving through seemingly the middle of nowhere at night. It was at this point we rounded a small bend in the road, and the headlights fell upon a surreal sight. There were 4 figures emerging from the forest and crossing the road, wearing what looked to be long cloaks with the hoods up and holding flashlights. One guy at the back of the group was dragging a large duffel bag, a human-sized duffel bag. We all froze and stopped mid-conversation, and as soon as our high beams landed on the 4 figures, they froze as well. James pulled to the left and went around them. Driving past them felt like an eternity because we couldn't have been going over 5 miles per hour due to the shitty condition of the road. Sitting in the passenger seat, I could see them inches beyond my window, and they were indeed wearing black robes and holding flashlights. I didn't get a good look at the bag, but judging by the way the guy was holding it, something very heavy was inside the bag. None of us said a word until the road straightened out, and we were far past these guys, at which point James muttered, "The hell was that?" We continued down the road in silence until I heard Lucas say, "Holy shit," and repeat himself in a louder and panicked voice. He said, "They're fucking coming back." I twisted around in my chair to see Lucas pointing out at the road. I could barely see anything, but about 100 yards away, we saw the beams of 4 flashlights shaking erratically. The guys were without a doubt running after us. All of us screamed at James to floor it, and he sped down the road. The car was bouncing and shaking uncontrollably as we flew over berms and potholes. I kept my eyes on the flashlight beams until we rounded another bend in the road, and they were out of sight. Thankfully, the path did manage to take us back to the main road. James gunned it down the path until we popped off by Croak Road and got the hell out of there. The weirdest thing about it was, there couldn't have been a vehicle anywhere near those guys for 50 miles in either direction. We would have seen one if there had been. We'd explored most of the area before, and there wasn't anywhere to pull off the road and park. We didn't say anything more until we were back at my place. We talked about it for a bit, and then my friends went home and James and I went to bed. I didn't know if we should call the cops or not, but James, who I'd guess would be the adult in this situation, seemed reluctant, so I dropped it. I never told my parents until just before writing this, and they kind of scolded me for not telling them, and that we should have contacted the authorities just to report suspicious people in the preserve. I still wish I knew how they got there. Where were they going? And what was in the bag? 2. This incident took place a couple of months ago when colleges were still running. For context, I'm a 21-year-old female attending college in the next town over to where I live. I travel by train to get there, and then have to walk through a pretty quiet residential area to arrive. Would be a much longer walk if I didn't take a shortcut in which I have to hop a fence to get to. This fenced area is what I presume to be an old hiking path that gets closed off due to flooding, making the path inaccessible. I've never had trouble getting through, so I never thought much of it, and take the route daily. My older sister once wanted to visit my college, and we took that path. She hated it. She says she felt uneasy and didn't like the thought of me walking it alone, being that it's isolated and is surrounded by woods on either side. She made me promise that I would not take the shortcut anymore, which I did, but after a week of being late to classes, I continued hopping the fence. I now wish I had listened to her. Just before the whole world ending, I was doing my normal routine. Getting out of college at the end of the day and saying bye to my mates, I headed to the path and hopped over the fence. By this time, I was in my second year of college and used to it by now. I'd never felt uneasy before, just plugged in my music and trotted along. It was about 8-ish. I normally stay behind after class to use the VR room, so it was getting darker. I know now I was being stupid and should have taken a more populated route. Never really feeling uneasy before, I didn't sense anything wrong until about halfway down the path. Suddenly feeling watched. Now I have a pretty good gut instinct for bad shit, just a bit of an airhead when it comes to street smarts. I don't know how to describe it, but I just felt like I needed to get the hell out of there. I remember looking around and not seeing anything out of the ordinary, and put it down to paranoia. Looking back, I should have listened to my gut and bolted, but hindsight is 20/20. So setting off on my merry way with my music blasting, I noticed that the weight of my metal water bottle was no longer present on the side of my rucksack. Stopping, I turned around and see that it is laying perfectly upright in the middle of the path a little way back. So, alarm bells should have been blaring by now, but at the time I was tired and just shrugged off the weirdness and jogged back to grab it. Big mistake. As soon as I bent down to grab it, something slams into my side, like full-on floors me. Now, I'm not a small lass, I'm tall for a girl and have some weight on me, so it takes more than a push to send me flying. I felt like a bull had just charged full speed into my side. Also not expecting it, I rightfully thudded to the ground pretty damn hard, headphones flying off on impact. All my family say that I have bones of steel, so I knew right away that physically I was fine. All I was concerned with was what the hell just happened. I hang around with some rowdy lads from college, so my first thought was one of them wanted to scare me, but put way too much strength into it by accident. It's happened before. I was pissed, scrambling to my feet. I was ready to deck someone. But to my surprise, no one was there. It didn't take me long to recover, so whatever hit me must have been close by. I started looking wildly around. Honestly, at this point, I wasn't angry anymore, I was scared. Apart from hearing the music from my headphones on the floor and my blood pumping in my ears, it was completely silent. That was until I heard the crunch of leaves to the right of me. A little deeper into the woods, whipping around, I saw my attacker. I don't think I have ever felt my heart drop as fast as I did the moment we locked eyes. Standing a little ways off the path, half shielded by a tree, was this man. Dark and sunken eyes, with a fucking grin plastered to his face. I can't remember what he was wearing. All I can think about was that god-awful grin that seemed to stretch way too wide. Now, I would like to say I stood my ground and kicked the ever-loving shit out of him, but all I remember really doing is letting out this throttled attempt at a scream, turning and nubbing the fuck out of there. Getting to the fence, I flung myself over and hit the pavement on the other side. I'm not a crier, I don't cry. But as I jogged my way to the train station, I felt hot tears fall to my cheeks. I didn't tell anyone, still haven't. I got to my apartment, bandaged up my bleeding knee and hands, and that was it. I've never taken that path again, and now I'm moving away, I won't ever have to. Be safe out there, guys. 3. Wendell was a panhandler near my college. I always gave him my change when I had extra. Usually I keep a hard rule not to give money to individuals because I give it to local charities instead, where I can be sure the money is going to a specific cause. This one panhandler, though, he always sang opera music quite beautifully, all things considered. Even though it was clear he was begging for money due to poverty and homelessness, not busking for tips, I always thought it was admirable that he was trying to perform a service in exchange for the money. And I don't like carrying coins, so I gave what I could. It wasn't much, barely $1 each time. I would occasionally strike up conversations with Wendell, even if I didn't have any money for him. He liked to make students laugh with funny impressions or jokes. He was a bit older. I'm an undergrad. He was probably 40s to 50s. So we'd mostly have quick chats about the news or the weather or whatever. Nothing deep. Sometimes he'd randomly share something so intimate that I'd feel obliged to reciprocate with something at least superficially personal. Example, he'd blurt out that he almost went to college on a baseball scholarship, but drugs ruined everything. I'd be like, oh, wow, sorry to hear that. I play volleyball. Not for a scholarship, though. See you around, okay? Once Wendell called me over while I was walking with a professor and my advisor, and I didn't want to be rude, so I went over just to say a quick hello and introduce my advisor. When we walked away, my advisor was pretty clearly horrified and asked why Wendell knew my name. I explained our little friendship. He said the homeless in this city weren't like the homeless in my smaller town back home. I figured he was being elitist, and I think he could tell I hadn't taken him seriously, because after we dropped the subject just before I left, he reiterated that I shouldn't forge friendships with the homeless population in this city, or even give them money because the chronically homeless, the ones on the streets enough that you could get to know them, tended to have criminal or addictive histories. I was surprised because my advisor was usually pretty progressive and compassionate, so I appealed to him with, Wendell is a victim of a post-capitalist society, and all the other things I'd learned in his very own class. But he wasn't having any of it, basically saying however Wendell became chronically homeless, now he was, and I should act accordingly. So my professor strongly implored me not to continue even talking to Wendell at all. I've kind of shook my head thinking, okay, boomer, and if anything, felt fortified by the warning. Like it was a confirmation that I was a radical doing the right thing, leading a new path, breaking down barriers, bettering society. I got closer to Wendell and shared more about my life with him. But the very next time I talked to Wendell, he was really irritable and distant, and I wasn't sure why, until he said, So your boyfriend, you two live together or what? And I had no idea what he was talking about. I said, what boyfriend? The guy I met from yesterday, you were walking down the street with. And I laughed, explaining that it wasn't my boyfriend, it was just my academic advisor. Then all of a sudden he wasn't irritable anymore, he was as chatty as he'd ever been. I probably should have taken that as a red flag, but I didn't think about Wendell much at all then. I only saw him once or twice a week, and only for a few minutes. It was around then that Wendell started bringing me gifts. I'd pass him, and he'd have a flower for me, or a metal machine piece. I never refused because I figured it was a means of preserving his dignity when accepting money, like with his opera singing. One of my roommates did remark on the flower once, and when I explained, she said it was weird. I thought she was also just being elitist and that I was enlightened, bridging the class divide, and superior to her neoliberal paranoia. I mean, come on, it was just a flower. My advisor clocked all this, so brought it up with me again a while later, saying he was worried I was being manipulated. I tried to tell him about Wendell's opera singing and impressions, and how he even almost went to college, but then I remember the reason he lost his baseball scholarship, so I stopped short. Looking at it through that lens kind of made me reconsider the whole thing. I thought about what my professor had said, sparing the details, We did talk for like half an hour, and I finally connected the dots that Wendell did have a history of drug use, and he sometimes mentions how a previous girlfriend, overreacting to something he'd done, had derailed his life besides the drugs. I decided maybe I should think about distancing myself a little. But very shortly after the pandemic hit and classes went virtual, so to save on rent, I went home to my parents' house, still in the state but not near campus at all. About 3 weeks into being home, I was watching a friend's Insta story when I heard Wendell singing opera in the background and thought, oh, I forgot all about him. Hope he's doing all right. And that was that. I kept watching different stories. Later that night, something about the story kind of stuck in my gut. It had popped into my mind a few times subconsciously, but I'd ignored it. But it kept coming back, so I decided to go watch it again. That's when I realized my friend's video wasn't from our college town. It was from my much smaller hometown, which is nowhere near my college. That freaked me out a little, but I figured everyone moved around when the pandemic hit. My town isn't that small, isn't that far from the college. It was probably a coincidence. I really wanted to mention it to my parents, but they had always warned me against talking to homeless people, besides, like, can I buy you a meal? So I felt too embarrassed to explain the situation to them, especially since it was probably a coincidence, and I would sound so conceited if I were like, he definitely followed me here, because aren't I just so great that he's probably obsessed with me? We have a type 1 diabetic in the family, so we took quarantining very seriously. I figured I'll never see him anyways, I'm not going out anytime soon. It doesn't matter where he is. And nothing happened. Well, one thing. A girl from my high school, who also ended up at my college, called me and, in summary, said, this is going to sound really weird, but I feel like I should say something. I was downtown and a beggar asked me about you, like, specifically you. He knew you were on club volleyball, he knew your major. I didn't tell him anything, but I thought you should know. I was pretty alarmed at first. How would he know I know this girl? But once we talked, I learned she'd been wearing a sweatshirt from our college, so I thought about it and decided he probably saw that sweatshirt, figured she might know me from college, since we were both from this town, and was just trying to find out how I was doing. I thought it was sweet, also a little weird, but he was a little weird. That was part of his charm. I thanked her, but told her not to worry about it. Besides, I wasn't in town much longer anyways. I decided to go live back near campus. It was impossible to get my coursework done with my whole family around all day. So I went back to campus a while later. We didn't think about Wendell at all, until I saw him back on the same corner just a week after I returned to campus. Okay, even I knew at that time that something was wrong. I stopped giving him money, stopped talking to him, but I was so humiliated by how high and mighty I had been, insisting that nothing was wrong, and everyone else was being paranoid and elitist, that I decided not to tell anyone what I had noticed. I was already barely leaving my apartment, never going to campus, and his usual spot was right by campus. I felt bad about potentially hurting his feelings or reading too far into the situation, but I figured he'd get the message, and better safe than sorry. After finals, I decided to visit my brother in a different state. His roommate had moved home, leaving an extra bed, so I drove up to his place to celebrate the end of the year, to get away from it all. About the 9th day in, I was woken up way earlier than usual. When my brother isn't working or in school, he sleeps until noon, to the sound of my brother talking at the door. I got up to see what was going on, because we weren't seeing anyone. We stayed totally quarantined. His state was being hit hard. My brother was talking nicely to someone outside through a crack in the door, but when he turned, he looked royally pissed at me. He turned back outside and said, "Hold on here," closed the door despite the other guy protesting. But I couldn't hear what he said exactly. My brother immediately got in my face and, whisper yelling, said, "Mom and Dad are gonna kill you." I had no idea what he was talking about, but my first thought was the cops had come to arrest me for something. It was the only logical thought I could generate first thing in the morning. The only thing I could imagine being arrested for was my fake ID, which I only even used to get into concerts, and obviously none lately, so I was really in shock. But my brother was still going, as best I can remember, because I was panicked at this point. He was saying, "And I'm gonna kill you, this is not cool, you didn't even ask." I wouldn't have said yes anyways. "But you didn't even think to ask." I realized that didn't align with being arrested, so finally I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "You're dating a 40-year-old guy, older 45? Of all the people out there, I mean, Jesus, Dad's gonna kill you and then have a heart attack and die, which will kill Mom. And you invited him to my house while we were supposed to be social distanced? You two can go to a hotel because he isn't coming in here. I wasn't a dick to him, out of respect to you. But if he doesn't leave now, that's gonna change." So I had no idea what he was talking about, none. I hadn't connected any of the pieces yet. Because you've got to remember, Wendell was such a small part of my life until this point. I almost never saw him or thought about him. My whole world had been turned upside down by a pandemic in the preceding few months. He was background noise, faint background noise, compared to all the other stuff I had going on. So I just said the first thing that came to mind. "Dude, I don't know why you're getting so mad at me. I don't have a boyfriend. I don't know what you're talking about. Someone's got the wrong house." My brother looked like he was ready to rip my face off. He said, "We're adults, come on, don't fucking lie to me. I'm not Mom and Dad. We can't deal with this if you're going to lie to my face." I said I wasn't lying, and I think he could tell from my expression and tone that I was genuinely serious. So now, he was as confused and irritated as I was, and he was like, "You didn't just vaguely say he was here for his girlfriend, he used your name, he rattled off a ton of very exact info. I think he said he said you guys had a fight and he was here to work things out." Now, I've been looking for a boyfriend for a long time, so I was half thinking, maybe dreams do come true. Might as well see who it is. But I was also starting to feel a bit sick in the pit of my stomach, because it would be one thing if this happened on campus or back home. But I had changed states. My brother moved to this state for school, and I don't know anyone here but him and his friends. So I finally did the obvious thing and looked through the peephole. I almost didn't recognize him at first because he had showered, shaved, and changed into clean clothes. For the first time since I'd known him. But sure as shit it was Wendell standing on my brother's doorstep, hundreds of miles from his original corner. I was so scared I couldn't speak. My heart was pounding like I was slipping under deep water with my legs tied. I just backed away from the door and sat down on the couch and tried to collect myself. My brother thought this was my affirming that there really was some secret older boyfriend, who had just made himself known, so it took a minute for him to cut off his ranting and his dramatic, "what will grandma think" stuff. Finally he realized I was tearing up and he sat down, calmed down, and apologized, and said we'd figure it out, and I whispered, still out of breath, "No, you don't understand. He followed me here." My brother still didn't get it. "What, you didn't want him to come here? What was your fight about?" he asked, still thinking this guy was my boyfriend. Ugh! I managed to repress my panic enough to explain the broad strokes to him. But I don't think he fully grasped how creepy it was in the moment, because he was like, "You're shitting me. That's hilarious. I'll take care of this." He went to the door and called from behind it. "Yo, just checked. She's not here. Must have packed out this morning. You should do the same. I'm taking this social distancing thing real serious," and winked at me. That's when, as my brother says when he tells this story, it got real. Wendell said, "You're lying. I heard her in there. Tell her I'm sorry. I don't know why she's been avoiding me, but I got cleaned up for her. And I'll take her anywhere she wants to go. Tell her it, and don't lie. I'll know if you lie." That rubbed my brother the wrong way, and he said back, "Bro, you're not taking her anywhere. Now get off my deck before we have a problem." And Wendell sounded like he was walking away, but instead he was going over to the window. When I saw him staring, he looked different than I'd ever seen him. Even that few seconds earlier when I'd glanced through the peephole. His clothes were clean, but they didn't match. Eyes bugged out of his head. White stuff caked on the corners of his mouth I hadn't noticed at first. Shaking, just kind of disconnected from reality. He started banging on the window, shouting things like, "That's my girlfriend. You can't keep her in there. You little bitch-ass, let her out, you bitch-ass, let her out. Let her out. I'm coming, baby, I'm coming." I couldn't tell if it was meant as a threat or a reassurance. I was so scared. I was too scared to run or even move. I think my brother was almost as surprised by the sudden outburst. He was rolling up his sleeves like he was preparing to go out there, and I was trying to make my voice work to beg him not to. But I was so anxious, scared, embarrassed, and sad that I missed all the signs leading up to this, all the opportunities to prevent it. That our friendship was never the wholesome thing I thought it was. Though, of course, that's something I had already begun to grapple with before this day. And had so many thoughts swirling in my head, fear being chief among them. All I could do was scream. Not words, just "Ugh!" and cover my ears to drown the whole situation out. Before my brother could charge out the door, he's an athletic guy, but I don't think he's ever actually been in a physical fight. Wendell punched through the window. Nothing actually happened when he punched through. There was an eerie moment of silence where nobody moved. I think I even stopped screaming. But when he pulled his hand back, all hell broke loose. A fair amount of blood started spurting out when he pulled his hand back through the glass. The things he was shouting started to make even less sense, along the lines of, "Look what you did to me! This is a test! I told you I couldn't be stopped, bitch-ass!" And the look in his eyes got even more distant. I think the sight of the blood, which has always made my brother really squeamish, made him realize this was real, and he finally yelled, "Damn it, sis, call 911!" while he leaned against the door which Wendell was now repeatedly running into, even though he was nowhere close to breaking it down. I don't even remember making the call, but apparently I did, because within 10 minutes the police arrested Wendell without resistance. He kept trying to tell him his girlfriend was trapped in the house, and he'd come all this way to save her. My poor brother was even momentarily handcuffed and had to explain he hadn't taken me hostage. Probably one of the most haunting memories of the whole event is, as they carted Wendell off for arrest, he started singing opera music. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 516. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use and sent in stories for use in this video. Okay, well, I'm hoping to get work wrapped up tonight. Then I'm going to take a day just to veg out on the sofa, maybe play some games. I've been kind of getting into No Man's Sky quite a bit recently, but even playing with some of the Hellfreezer community here and there. And on Wednesday I'll do that. Then Thursday is errand day. It's that time of the month again where I need to pay the rent and the council tax. Boo, but it needs to be paid. I'll get those paid. I'll top up heating and electricity. I need to make a phone call to have someone come and inspect my windows, because apparently in I think about 2018 when they installed them, and they're just getting around to addressing it now, some of the parts used to make the windows might not have been quite right, so there's a chance they could literally open them up and they could fall apart. If you open them a particular way, which isn't even the way I open them, so it's not a major problem. But that apparently has to be done, so the burden falls on me to phone them up. Got the letter in last week, so it's convenient for me to phone them this week, so I'll do it then. And let me think, any other things I need to do? Pay bills, make that phone call, arrange an appointment for them. I've been reluctant to actually do it because I hate having strangers in my house at the best of times. But, you know, you put up with it because things need to be done. People have jobs to do. You don't want to be a dick about it. But right now, it's obviously not ideal, but things are improved in Scotland, especially in comparison to other areas of the UK. We're doing not bad. It's not perfect yet, but we're doing not bad. So I'm a bit more comfortable phoning now than I would have been a couple of weeks back, for example. So I'll get this dealt with and out of the way. Then I will I'll try and enjoy the rest of the weekend, but I'll probably end up doing some work-related stuff. I usually do. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.